say that the war between Pepsi and Coca-Cola in the 80s and 90s was brutal would be an under-exaggeration. Heading into the 1980s, Pepsi versus Coca-Cola was national. Considering Pepsi was being sold in every country and territory, and Coca-Cola not being sold in Cuba or North Korea, if something changed, everyone around the globe would feel it. And considering Pepsi was good at marketing to the younger generation, in the mid-1980s, they had Coca-Cola cornered, which led to Coca-Cola releasing what is widely known as one of the most hated products ever distributed. New Coke. New Coke was introduced on April 23rd, 1985 and became so widely hated so incredibly quickly that everybody who worked at Pepsi got a paid day off. Pepsi also aired a commercial which showcases a person drinking Pepsi for the first time. The person later exclaims,
"Somebody out there tell me why Coke did it. Why they changed. First they said they were the real thing, then they said they were it. Then kablooey, they changed. So now I'm gonna try my first Pepsi. But I still want to know why Coke changed. Now I know why."
Then, at the Houston Astros versus the Cincinnati Reds game later that day, New Coke ads were booed heavily. A longtime Coke drinker named Fidel Castro called New Coke a sign of the American capitalist decadence. A psychiatrist that Coke hired to listen in on the calls said that the people phone screamed in agony as if they lost a family member. However, on July 11th, 1985, 79 days after New Coke was introduced, it was reverted and never to be seen again. But enough about New Coke. Let's talk about what you're really here for. The Pepsi points case. One man versus the biggest company in the world. Leonard versus PepsiCo Incorporated. Now imagine it's the year 1995 and you're watching Toy Story or something. You are a toy! And a commercial comes on and looks something like this. Toy! You weren't the real Buzz Lightyear, you're an action figure! The commercial catches your eye since you've never really seen anything like this.
Introducing the new Pepsi Stuffed Catalog.
At the end of the commercial, you see this.
Now, the more Pepsi you drink, the more great stuff you're going to get.
Sure beats the bus.
It's obviously a joke, right? There's no way anybody would be dumb enough to try to buy a fighter jet off of Pepsi points. Well, you thought wrong. The jet in that commercial is an AV-8 Harrier II Harrier jet, which was at the time worth $37.4 million. And John Leonard, who was a business student at the time, discovered a loophole in which he could buy one Pepsi point for just cents. Why John Leonard cashed in a $700,000 check to Pepsi. Nobody really knew what to do. Pepsi, of course, denied the offer at first because the jet in the commercial was clearly added for comedic purposes. Pepsi moved on. John Leonard sure didn't and sued Pepsi. Before we get into that, let's take it back. Many consider the 90s to be the peak of advertising. The commercial laws that existed today didn't exist back then, and were almost a free-for-all for commercials. And for reference, if you Google iconic commercials, most of them are from the 90s. Back to the commercial. If they had thought that the fighter jet would be as big as it was, there'd be no doubt that the commercial would not air. On March 27th, 1996, John Leonard cashed a check and waited. Pepsi, upon receiving the offer, sent the check back with a letter saying that the AV-8 Harrier jet was not a part of the offer and apologized for any misunderstanding or confusion. Of course, John Leonard wasn't just going to give up right there. He got together with his lawyers, and his lawyers sent a letter saying that it was completely unacceptable, and it explicitly states that if you obtain obtain 7 million Pepsi points, then you would get a Harrier jet. Looking at it now, the plan was simply to make the commercial more memorable and to simply be funny, which is why when Pepsi decided to air the Pepsi stuff commercial, they didn't expect anything to do with the fighter jet. But who really is John Leonard? He'd have to be some rich guy from a rich neighborhood with rich parents to casually buy a fighter jet with Pepsi points, right? Wrong. John Leonard was simply a 20-year-old community college student who worked in Little League. John Leonard's friends told him about the jet and he was intrigued. So when Pepsi denied the offer, John Leonard did the unexpected and sued Pepsi, despite the jet being put there for comedic purposes. The lawsuit was heard almost around the world, and people found it unbelievably shocking. The claim said that Pepsi suffered a breach of their contract and committed fraud. And well, considering on how dumb the whole situation was, the court ruled in Pepsi's favor. John later appealed the case to 2000, but the ruling was denied, and the story ends there. But what is John Leonard doing today? Today, John is almost 50 years old and is living in Alaska and works as a national park ranger and has 2 kids. About a month ago, on November 17th, 2022, Pepsi Where's My Jet aired on Netflix. It received positive responses and mainly covers everything that I covered in my video, but with footage of the AV-8 fighter jet there. Recently, Woman in Home had an interview with John Leonard, and John Leonard says that his 20-year-old self was crazy if he thought that he was going to get that jet, and later compared it to the McDonald's hot coffee case, which is another case that I plan to cover. And the hot coffee case is about McDonald's coffee being so hot that a woman got third-degree burns from the coffee. John Leonard is embarrassed about the situation, yet proud that somebody as young as 20 years old can go up against a multi-billion-dollar company and get a totally bogus lawsuit to court. Later, in 1999, the TV commercial aired again, but with a slight change. The plane was 700 million Pepsi points instead of 7 million, so the mistake couldn't be made again. Or no, it can't be. They put just kidding at the end. Anyways, that was the video. Back to the commercial. If they have thought that So when Pepsi denied the offer, John then ruled in Pepsi's favor. John later appealed the